Hello and welcome to Raider HQ After Dark. I'm your host Raider, and in this video I wanted to go over the TERA theory for service connection. And I have naughty dogs, so I've had to record this a couple times now. So we're going to try to get through this, but let me try doing my software here. So the TERA theory is actually toxic exposure risk activities. That's what TERA stands for. And this is going to be part one of this video because in order to actually explain Terra, it's going to take like a very long time. And so this one, I'm just doing a general overview of the theory. The next video that I'm going to do is talking about going into more detail about how your Terra exposures are conceded. So I'm going to touch on it in this video, but I'm not going to go too in depth. You should watch the video throughout, but I just want to let you know. So let's get into it. So, what is a Terra? Terra is a new theory for service connection. This was added with the PACT Act legislation, and it was enacted on 8/10/2022. And it works similarly to how the direct theory for service connection works. You know how for a direct theory, you have to show that you have a current diagnosed disability and you had some kind of in-service stressor, and then you have to provide kind of a nexus between the two, that the in-service injury is what you're experiencing now. It's like a continuation of that, first manifestation. The same thing here, but a little bit different. So the element two for the Terra theory is, you have an exposure to a chemical in service that created the current diagnosed disability. Now, another thing that's a little bit different is that your initial manifestation of the disease could have started in service, in which it would be still considered direct, but due to a chemical. But you can have a little bit more leeway when it comes to the medical nexus. A lot of doctors don't believe that, like, let's say you were exposed to some kind of chemical in service 20 years ago and you just now started manifesting a condition. For the Terra theory, you have a lot of bias from the examiners. They either believe that that's true or they don't believe that that's true. And I've gotten into a kind of debate with actual contract managers for the examiners, the contract examiners. And one of the debates that I had with them was they said that there was no way for you to store the chemical in your body, for 20 years in order for it to manifest. And I gave them the example of, okay, well, if I was exposed to the chemical and I gained a lot of weight in a short amount of time, would the chemical be exposed in the adipose tissue? And they said, okay, I'll give you that one. That's one where, it could happen if they lost a lot of weight recently and then it manifested. So I was just making that, giving that story based upon, how there's an internal bias. And I challenged their internal bias. And I got them to concede that one situation or circumstance, but that's it. So another thing interesting about Terra is that it's constantly changing. Unlike the other theories for service connection that are very well established, right? There's not very much that changes with other theories. Terra, because it's so new, is constantly going under revisions. So, and not just that, but it's so new that it hasn't been inducted into the manual yet. So there's an internal document called the PACT Act SOP that is an intranet based document that you can't gain access to. Even if you find the hyperlink in the manual, there's no way for you to get to it to see what the current rules and regulations are and how it's being applied to you. And the reason why that matters is because we're on version 6 now. If you were granted service connection for PACT Act in 2022, the rules on how to grant that same condition have changed so much since then that you might not be granted today if you went under if your evidence was reviewed by a rater today versus then, you probably wouldn't be granted now. They have done a lot of scaling back of the ability to grant under the Terra theory. And the reason why is because that first 6 months well, we didn't start doing it until January. Like, we didn't actually start adjudicating claims for Terra until January 1st of 2023. But that first 6 months was wild. And the reason why it was wild is because the examiners, you were just throwing random things at them going, "Hey, could this be possible? 51% certainty, could this be possible?" "Sure." And they were saying yes to almost everything at the time. I mean, if they weren't saying yes, then it had some kind of genetic predisposition, or there was some other, cause that was more, more viable than say the Terra. But for the weirdest things, people were getting granted. I mean, like sleep apnea due to, break free fluid or something like that. Like, and they weren't providing any evidence. They were just, examiners were just going, yeah, sure. And we were taking it. And so it was kind of like one of those situations where if you got in during that period of time, don't touch anything, type thing. So another thing about it, and this is something that'll be covered in another video, probably the video tomorrow, is how is Terra conceded? And a brief overview of it is Terra is conceded from multiple sources of concession. Okay. So you can have location based Terra, you can have situational based Terra, and you can have like MOS based Terra. Okay. And the way that we concede it is typically based upon like Eiler exposure reports, which are produced by the DoD. So what'll happen is the VSR will send in a request to say, "Hey, look, do you have an Eiler report on this veteran?" And if the veteran was a Persian Gulf War veteran and later, then we typically will have some kind of Eiler report from the DoD. If you predate the 1991, then we do not have one on file for you. Now, the M21 manual also has instances of well-established um, Terras, like asbestos exposure based upon MOS and things like that. Like, so you can have it to where there's already established regulations for that particular Terra that you're claiming. So the M21 manual is a source of concession. Veteran reports. So if you report explicitly that you were exposed to something, and it shows up in your medical records or in your OMPF records, your military personnel file, that you were exposed to it, then, like medically, then that's fine. We can concede it that way also. And then you have also a self-report MOS, military occupational specialty report, where let's say like you're a fuel handler and you're claiming exposure to fuels, then you would have to report that and let us know. But that's another way that you can be conceded for having Terra exposure. And just something about the MOS based exposure is that whenever we first started granting these, we were able to do the PACT Act SOP talks about the two different types of exposures that you can or well claim for concession is you can explicitly claim a Terra exposure, like I was exposed to jet fuel, like you say that somewhere in your claim or in your documents that you submit. Or there's something called implicit Terra exposure, where it is implied that you were exposed. Now, during the first year, probably year and a half, the VSR and the Raider was allowed to imply exposures. So if you were like, let's say you were a fuel handler, then we could just go, okay, based upon your MOS, it's pretty clear that you would be exposed to fuel. So I'm just going to write that down. Well, that also got under Big VA's skin because there was a lot of people getting, like all these exposures put in front of the examiner, and the examiners were like, yes, yes, yes. And because the VA can't control how the examiners are going to actually, like they can't control how the examiners respond. What they can control is how much evidence gets to the examiners. So they dialed back on MOS and said, "Look, we're not doing implicit anymore. Unless you can point to a job duty or something in their record that shows they fueled vehicles, like it's actually written in there. You can't imply it." So they made it to where it was like you have to be able to show your work in order to claim it, which was very like I get it in certain instances where if you had a job duty and you said, "Hey, look, I was doing this thing over here, but I was exposed to jet fuel." And there's no way, like, I can't even think of a way that you were exposed to jet fuel. You couldn't just take a person's word for it. But there's also something to be said about why do I have to, if my MOS is explicitly wrapped around a Terra exposure, in which I was a radiology tech in the military. And so, I mean, like, it should not take, or we're not putting anybody on the moon, I guess is what I'm saying, to make the correlation that I was exposed to radiation as a radiology tech, right? Like, I shouldn't have to say that. But the VA is making us say that so that way they can, in my opinion, limit the amount of access that, you know, the examiners get in terms of like which exposures are presented to them because they're more likely to say yes. Now, unique factors about TERA. Okay, currently TERA ratings are being decided based upon the PACT Act SOP, like I said, and internal VA determinations not publicly available. And that's a problem that I have with the whole process is that we have these, and it's down here, but it's TERA memorandums. So a TERA memorandum is a summary of all of the TERAs that you were exposed to. So it can include, like, I will just say, is there an ILA report? Like, question 2 on the TERA memorandum is there an ILA report? Yes or no? Yes, there is. Does it have exposures listed in it? Yes or no? Yes, it does. And, are those exposures like 2C, question 2C is like, are any of those exposures listed as being over the limit, the therapeutic limit, or whatever you want to say? Is it really toxic? And you'd say yes or no. But yeah, so these are conceded kind of behind the scenes. And you don't really know. And the problem that I have is when you're denied under Terra, you never know what it is that they said was in play, right? They didn't say you were exposed to lead, fuels, whatever. They don't say anything. They'll just say Terra was conceded within your Terra memorandum, right? Like, that's the favorable finding that you get. And part of the reason why they do that, it's not the raider being a jerk face or anything like that. It has to do with the number of characters that are in the favorable finding section. Is that nobody wants to list out or take 7 hours to list out all the different exposures. Some of the individuals, ILers, that went to many different countries in Southwest Asia, they could have hundreds of exposures in their ILA report. It's horrible. Like, and I don't mean it's horrible like from a like I'm lazy sense. It's just, remember back whenever I said that the Terra memorandums update all the time? It's horrible because if I actually, if something changes on that, then I can cause a clear and unmistakable error by saying that you had something on there, or at least a duty to assist error by not updating it. So there's a reason why the raters are being generic on it, is because these things are updating all the time. But it doesn't help the veteran, right? Like, it doesn't help any of you figure out what was put before the examiner, what the examiner weighed in on, because the examiners typically do the same thing where they say, to include all potential exposures due to Southwest Asia or whatever, whatever location or exposures you had. Now, the only good news about this, because I don't find that to be good news, because, you're flying blind on appeal at that point in time. And I don't like that. But good news is, if you got one of those early ratings, right, in which we granted you, and then we changed our mind about how we interpreted the Terra memorandum moving forward, your rating is actually locked in, because the change that was made was not a liberalizing law change or an official change to the manual. So it doesn't actually rise to the occasion to affect your rating decision. So if you were granted for like hypertension due to lead exposure or something like that, and in a subsequent finding, they said, you know what, I can't find lead in his records at the time. Well, as long as it's not due to fraud or it's not due to a clear and unmistakable error, and that wouldn't rise to a clear and unmistakable error, then you get to keep the award. Even if you do increases on it, the service connection should be retained. So that's the good news with like all of these changes that are happening and have happened in the past is that an establishment will be retained. And I got about 5 minutes before my software is going to cut out here. Okay, so effective dates for TERA. Now, I will touch on effective dates, but the earliest effective date that you can get granted for TERA itself is 8/10/2022, because that's whenever the liberalizing law was enacted. Now, if you have a Vietnam situation or a change, like if you're going for like Agent Orange exposure and you're just doing Vietnam and there's no changes to the PACT Act that happened that affected it, then it can go back prior to 8/10/2022 if that's the case. But for anything that was changed in the PACT Act that is considered a TERA, then you can't actually go back further than 8/10/2022 because it's tethered to the liberalizing law change of the PACT Act. Now, for requirements, sometimes like if you filed a claim today, right? You obviously can't go back. If you filed a claim for something new today, you obviously can't go back to 8/10/2022. However, what you can do is you can be gifted a year prior to your date of claim because as long as you met criteria under the date the entitlement arose, prior to 8/10/2022, and what that means is if you were diagnosed with the condition prior to 8/10/2022, you can get, if granted under the TERA theory, you can get a year prior due to the liberalizing law earlier effective date regulation. Okay, so keep that in mind. Look for that in your rating determinations and decisions. All right, and how to claim a condition under TERA. This is why I had already talked about this. You have to explicitly claim the disability due to the toxic exposures. You also have to explicitly uh, claim the location of the exposures if it's a location based. Then cite the location in your claim. So you have to say, hey, I'm just going to use Bosnia. I was in Bosnia. If your exposures are due to a job duty, then you must, and I'm highlighting this, must cite the specific chemicals involved, lead, fuel, JP8, like whatever it is, and your job duties that caused you to be in contact with that. Like, hey, look, I was exposed to lead because I was, part of my job duties was sanding down the ship. Fair enough. Like, you just got to tell us what it is. Because if you don't do this, we will not concede you for MOS related exposures these days because they've taken that ability from us to do the implicit TERA. You have to explicitly claim it and cite it right. And how to appeal a condition under TERA. So let's say you claim something under TERA and then you get denied, but you want to appeal it under a supplemental claim. So you need to go to your VSO and get a copy of all of your TERA to include your, like even if they just help you to let you transcribe it on a piece of paper. Look and see what's on your TERA memorandum and your ILA report. You need to know what chemicals you were exposed to. Then you need to research what it is that you claimed and do research studies about the chemicals that you were conceded and how they affect that claimed condition. And then once you're done with that, you need to go to a qualified clinician and have them weigh in on whether they think your specific condition was caused by that chemical exposure. And then, if that's the case, if your doctor agrees, then you get them to put that in your chart notes that they kind of agree to it. Now, if they don't, that's what this information is for. But all of this is to narrow it down. If you don't know what chemicals you were exposed to, there is no way to effectively appeal your claim under the TERA theory. So, this portion of your homework right here, you have to do. Like, you have to get this information. If you don't, you're flying blind and you can't win that way. So, I've got about 30 seconds left on this one. Basically, this is it for this video. I kind of just wanted to run through it and kind of talk about, just touch on it. And then tomorrow I'm going to do a video based upon like how the exposures happen. Anyway, that's about all I got for you on this one. Raider out.